I'm Don Samuels, and I'm here in Minneapolis. And of course, Minneapolis might have different meaning today than it did last year this time. We are one of the best places in the country to live, routinely best city for biking. We have the best theater, regional theater, the best nighttime entertainment. It is just a crown city in the United States and certainly in the Midwest. And so to hear all that has happened over the last several months since George Floyd was killed, we have, in essence, it seemed, become the capital of racism, capital of inequities. And in fact, some of the inequities have been unearthed. We are the worst in graduating African American kids from K through 12, and we're among the worst in all the gaps between white and black in incarceration, STDs, the worst in housing, home ownership, the worst gaps in all kind of quality of life issues, and that now stands in complete contrast to all the things we are best at. And so I've been, of course, quite familiar with these gaps. About 23 years ago, my wife Sandra and I decided to move into the Gap neighborhood of Minneapolis, you could call it, the Jordan neighborhood, where we've lived for 23 years. We raised 2 kids here, and we felt that our opportunities we had in life as African Americans. I actually grew up in Kingston, Jamaica, in a low-income part of Kingston. She grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and her family did well and moved to a suburb right after fair housing laws were passed. And so she grew up in the suburb after, I think, about 9 years old. But that flight out of Newark left Newark and the other American cities bereft of the black middle class. That's after white flight and integration. Then the black middle class left, and then cities like Newark and parts of Newark and parts of Minneapolis and other cities around the country had a void of leadership, a void of middle class, a void of capacity and connectedness in these inner city communities. And so it was in the light of that knowledge that we decided to not join the matrix, but to move into North Minneapolis. And that's where we've lived for 23 years. I was a toy designer at the time, and my wife was a business consultant. And we have, since when we moved into our house, actually, a bullet came through our baby's window, bedroom window. We knew we had to get started, so we immediately started a block club, and then after a year or so, joined the neighborhood group and had a lot of activities for improving the community. We felt that we were going to treat the neighborhood as ours, as if it was our parish, literally, because that was the parish method or arrangement that was standard here. You had the Polish Catholic neighborhoods, you had the Lutheran, German Lutheran communities, you had the Jewish communities, you had the Baptist, Swedish Baptist communities, and all these churches, congregations, and their residential patterns were married to each other. After fair housing laws and people started to move into communities that they were either banned from or were uncomfortable in, that's when you had the white flight and the breakdown of the integrity of this balkanized but patchwork but functioning reality. And so now we have very diverse communities in what became abandoned communities. They're now diverse. We have young whites who move in to buy up their first home. We have to move in for their first time in the US, and we have renters who are largely African Americans moving from other parts of the country, such as Detroit, Chicago, and Gary, and trying to find a better life in a better city. They all come here, and but the fabric of the community is not well knit as it was in the old segregated days. And so while we have the blessing of diversity, we have the curse of alienation, isolation, and a lack of communal integrity in the community. And so it's in this kind of setting, then, this kind of left behind factor in the community, that we find a lot of African American people struggling to make it into the middle class, and with inferior schools, etc. And this is the kind of community that George Floyd would have moved to. I'm not sure George lived here, but he lived either in South Minneapolis in a community like this, or here. That's the pretty standard thing. And so when George was killed, it brought back a flood of all this awareness, of all this reality that we live in Minneapolis, and it's caused a consciousness raising that now gives us an opportunity to do something different. Now I'm going to go back in time a little bit, and I'm going to share my screen here, if you don't mind, and yeah, there we go. And I'm going to take you to this presentation here, and let's see. And so this is when we, shortly after I moved into this neighborhood and had been organizing for a while, we started the Peace Foundation. And the Peace Foundation was started because I had just been elected to office, and saw that the violence in the neighborhood was not going to be solved just by City Hall. The attention to the issues in this community was just not there. And we needed to galvanize the community to communicate with City Hall and to each other for the good of the community. And so very soon, well, the first big project we had was Vigils. We had a Vigils every time someone was killed, and we would go to the place where the homicide took place. This is actually in an alley, and a young man was killed here. And you can see some of the raw emotions that would take place at these vigils. And some of these vigils were well attended. At this vigil, a young man who worked in this flower shop was killed, and he there were over 1,000 people at this vigil. And this is another smaller vigil. And the reason I had this slide is it's one of the rare ones that show this table and chair that I had this idea to, after a few vigils, that we'd get a table and chair. We'd have two books on the table, one to write notes to the family of the deceased, and one to write notes to the city council and the mayor, because I had begun to realize that the city council and the mayor were detached emotionally from the issues in this community. And so every time the vigil was over, I would take the book and take it back to my office, have my secretary type up the notes from the books and make copies of the original. Would put the originals in 14 manila folders, one for each council member, one for the mayor, and one for the police chief, and would and send them a typed copy in case it was too hard to read. of all of the statements that people made. So if you see, everybody in this circle would write a note to the mayor and the city council. And likewise, if you can imagine, everybody here would write a note. And the vigils would last from morning till night. And as you can imagine, it's pretty cold in Minnesota. So sometimes it was a pretty harrowing thing from morning till night out in 5 degrees or 0 degrees. And but it did, not everybody stayed. Some people stayed for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Sometimes we had a little tent. Sometimes we had a little fishing booth, ice fishing tent. Once it was so cold, someone brought a bus and we sat in the bus. But we were out there from, I would stay there anyway. My wife and I would stay. There's my wife right there, from morning till night. And so it was quite a statement of commitment. So now, the reason I had those slides up, and let me stay on this so we don't get too distracted, is that at such a vigil, I met a friend, named Brian Mogren. And Brian and I became fast friends. He came up to me at the vigil and he said, "Hey, do you know about Richard Rohr?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you should, because what you're doing here looks like Richard. He has a lot to say about grief and men, and you seem to be doing what Richard is teaching about." So he gave me a few tapes of Richard's, and I listened to them, and eventually Brian went to Albuquerque and for the Men's Rites of Passage, and a couple of years later I did too, I think in 2006. And so since that time, Brian and I have frequented the annual events or other things that Richard where he was teaching. He came to Minneapolis once, and in fact, after Brian introduced me to Richard's work, Richard came to Minneapolis to teach and for an event, and Brian invited him to his house and to meet me, and Richard came. And so Richard and I had a one-on-one dinner with Brian acting as our waiter for a wonderful 3 hours. And so that's even before I joined the Men's Rites. And after my Men's Rites, Richard, in Ghost Ranch, Richard had to drive back to Albuquerque, and he and I drove back in his truck, and we had another long talk. So I was fortunate to have had those two significant events. Now let's jump forward to George Floyd's death. And George is, of course, this is Cup Foods. This is the location of where the homicide took place, in front of that store. And this is before a memorial was set up or anything. This is like the day after. And people are having their first protest march, and they're marching from here to the 3rd precinct, where that night the 3rd precinct was burned. But I just wanted you to see that this was in real time. We were in this protest and we were walking towards the 3rd precinct, and we just did not have a good feeling. People were talking about kill the police. In the midst of all of this peaceful protest, there were individuals in the crowd that were sending this direct message that this was not just about protesting the death of George Floyd. It was a hate for police, and that it was not going to end well. So we didn't continue. We turned back after about halfway to the 3rd precinct. So this is Oh, that slide is, yeah, that shouldn't be there. This is showing you just a couple of the boarded up buildings. This is a boarded up building, beautifully boarded, I must say. As you can see that there were these beautiful graffiti signs that were put up all over town as people boarded the buildings that were damaged. Now, I tell you about this because we're leading up to our response, and we were after the riot, and the city council held a I guess you could call it an event in the park, and decided to recommend that or make a commitment that they were going to defund the police. And let me see, I'm trying to get out of this thing here. There we go. Yeah, decided that they were going to defund the police. And so what they did is they made the commitment and then took a vote and made a recommendation or to the city charter, to the charter commission, to recommend to the state the abolition of the police department and the replacement of it with another kind of a department. And that sent a direct message to the criminal community that not only did they want the police gone, but that the city council and the leadership of the city also did. And since that time, there's been such an uptick in crime that at this point last year, I think there was 20 something homicides, and this year we're up close to 70. So you can see the incredible, this hasn't happened since the 90s. And they say for every homicide, there are 7 shootings, meaning somebody gets injured. So you can imagine what the injuries are. I think they're at like 400. So it's way out of proportion. And then, you know, for the 400 shootings, there are hundreds of shots fired. Okay, and so just last week, just last Friday and last week, I'm sorry, just last Wednesday, down the street, there was a shooting, 21 shots fired, and the bullets went through the house of one of my neighbors, riddled her living room, and shots went over where the kids usually do their socially distanced learning. So you can see it's quite traumatic. We're in the middle of it. And people ask me, why don't you move? Why are you still there? Why don't you? And we raised our 2 girls here. They're in college now. Why don't you leave? And my answer is always that actually, with all the healing that we've been trying to do, putting money in for closing the gaps in education, putting money in for housing, putting money in for rehabilitation of ex-offenders, putting in money for helping young people after school, for mentors and tutors and all of that. That was the demise of the inner city was never caused by the decline in mentors, the decline in Title I dollars, the decline in money for ex-offenders. It was never the decline of this community where we live now, where you heard the gunshots and going through we heard the gunshots going through the room. That happened because white flight from this community and black middle class flight. This home that I'm in right now, a member of was the guy who built this was a member of Fourth Baptist Church, which was a Swedish Baptist church on this side of the road where blacks were not allowed to live. And this was a thriving community. It was called Baptist Hill because this is sort of on a hill. Well, this community didn't die because of any of those other factors. It died because, or declined because blacks moved in, and the Swedish Baptists here moved out. So did the German Lutherans, so did the Polish Catholics, so did the Jewish community, and as people of color moved in, this just became an abandoned community by the most mobile and upwardly mobile of the white community. That's the reason. And so, but it never is talked about as a solution that the middle class becomes again a part of this community. Middle class whites, middle class blacks, so we can diversify our residential patterns. That's never presented as a solution, even though that was the birth of the problem. And so it was this knowledge really that led Sandra and I to decide to get out of that matrix. And as two African American people of means, to move back into the community and to give what we could. And so it was out of that that I eventually became a city council member and a school board member. And now my wife and I run two different nonprofits. The first one, she does the Northside Achievement Zone, and I run micro grants. And so it changed our lives and our careers. I was a toy inventor designer for 30 years before I went into politics and started, and then eventually doing this job. And so you can see that it is the solution because it changed our lives, changed the way we relate to the community, and offered us opportunities to become part of the healing in a way that if we had lived out in the suburbs and had been mentoring a couple of black kids in the neighborhood, it would have been, our impact would have been significantly less. I never used to talk like this, actually, by the way. I never used to talk about this. I felt like people felt bad, like it made me look like I was doing the better thing than other people. And how are people supposed to think about me? And am I the great guy? But Sandra and I decided it's time to talk about it because we've been doing all these other things for inferior outcomes, and it's time to do some things of significance. So, during this big spike in crime, I was out in front of a liquor store on West Broadway in North Minneapolis, and I was brooding a little bit about what was happening. And I had just finished some centering prayer, and I had the urge to go out there. And I was standing facing the street, and the thought came to me to have essentially a vigil, a new kind of vigil, that to bring the community, call the community together to pray in an overt way for the community, in silence, in overt silence, if you will, and to get a tent and to make it a prayer tent and to invite people from all over the city to come. After a conversation with my wife and other friends, including Brian Mogren, who I told you about, we kind of solidified the idea, and I'm going to go back to my my screen, my PowerPoint, and bring you back up to this here. Yeah, so let me fast forward here. Yeah, so what we did is we created 2 tents. This is one of the tents, and sorry about this. Yeah, and this is, by the way, this is black clergy that we decided that the each it was going to be 30 days of prayer, and it was going to be from 10 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock in the evening. And we were fortunate enough to get this parking lot, which was different from the original one I had stood at. And you can see in the background that Foot Locker that's boarded and looted. To the right of that, which you can't see, is a dollar store which is looted, and to the left of that is a giant wash, which is a laundromat that was looted and trashed. Next to that was McDonald's, that was looted and trashed. And by the time we were there, they were repaired. And after that, there's a whole series of stores, including a U.S. bank, a restaurant, and other stores that were totally trashed, and they're still under repair. And this would have been in the middle of July. It took place from July 1st to July 30th, and this is one of the church teams that participated in their day. So they took charge of that day, and over the course of the day, they cycled in and out, and they were the hosts for that day. People would come in from all over the city, and they would be ushered into the prayer tent behind there, where you can see we had 9 mats on the floor, 8 by 10 mats, so that people would be separated, one on each mat, and they could stand, sit, or kneel, and they would pray in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And of course, 8 minutes and 46 seconds is how long it took for George Floyd's life to be taken by Officer Chauvin. And so it was a very emotional significance, the timing of the prayer. And when the prayer was over, the chime would be, the singing bowl would be chimed. People would leave the tent, and a new group of 9 would go in. And so that cycled in and out all day, from 10 in the morning till 7 in the evening, and then for 30 days. The first 10 days was for grieving. Now I'm going to try something new here. Let me come back to me, and yeah, the first 10 days was for grieving, grieving the death of George Floyd, grieving the destruction of our community, etc. The second 10 days was for openness to change. And we had intended to use some of the Center for Action and Contemplation language of don't know mind. But we felt that the community wouldn't be able to embrace that phrase without some orientation. And so we called it openness to change. And then the third 10 days was dreaming or praying for a new future. And those are the 3: grief, openness, and vision for the future. And so the prayers would be on those themes. So each prayer on the first 10 days, etc. We had, I'm going to try to do something here, which is kind of high risk because I couldn't. Um, but we had multiple did multiple roles, and one of the roles was to take videos of people who came in and after they prayed to stand in a certain area and uh, say what they were praying about, and what they were grieving about, what change they were open to, and uh, what vision they had for the future. And I want to show you some of those videos. And so I'm going to get the camera back and show you some of those videos. And we're just going to pick a couple random ones. Now, as you can see from your screen here, that there are a lot of people doing videos. You can see that. These are all people who did videos. I just captured some of them. We had a team that was working on this, and they captured the other ones. And we had children, and we had people of all races, as you can see, and all ages. So let's just pick one and let you hear it. So, by the way, these paintings behind these folks were all done on site. And the paintings were done on 4x8 panels. And they were basically, we had a gallery at the event. And each person was able, after the first week and the paintings were done, to stand in front of a painting and say what their dream for the future was, what they were grieving, etc. This is taking some kind of time here. So let me go back to me for a sec and we'll talk and then we'll go back to that. Yeah, each person stood in front of a painting. Before the paintings were done, they would stand just in front of a shrub and talk about the grief. And then in the middle of the second 10 days, the paintings were done and they could talk about their openness to change and their dream for the new future. We also had people to tie prayer ribbons on the posts of the tent after they were done praying. And we had a chalkboard where people could write their dreams and prayers. So let's hear what, for instance, this gentleman has to say. Great. So that's basically what they did, and we have about 600 of those. We have about 600 of those, believe it or not, those testimonials or videos. You can see them on our website, healingourcity.org. And or you can just Google Healing Our City in Minneapolis or Healing Our City Community, and you will get to the website. And what you'll see is, and I'll show you in a little bit, but yeah, so we had, of course, two tents. We had a hospitality tent, and we had a prayer tent. And so here we go. I'm going to open up again and give you a little bit of a view of that. I think I've figured this out. We won't put any sound on, but I'll just talk you through this. You come to the website, and this is our home. You can see the tent, and there are 9 mats. Every morning we picked up everything, put it in a storage trailer, and every every evening and every morning we put it back out. Tents stayed in place. So, so you can see here, the first day we had grief, the first 10 days, the second open to change, and the second vision for the future. Now, so for instance, if you go to grief, you will see all of the videos there, and you can hear what people are saying. Let's see what this young man is saying. But so then you can select any of the other ones once you, here he is. Yeah, so you can see that that was some very meaningful stuff being shared, very, very meaningful, and very um, significant. Somebody says, I can't see the videos. Okay, no sound. All right, I got you. Thank you. But what he was saying was all the things he was grieving. Yeah, I'm sorry about the audio, guys. Um, so yeah, so let's go back to that, and we won't do audio. We'll just do um, we'll just do the we'll just do the the visuals, the stills. I'll take you back to the website and walk you through it without playing any audio. Okay, so it's just that being on the website is a really good way of talking about it. So you can see there how it's how it's arranged. We had the prayer tent, and uh, this is the singing bowl. We had fresh flowers cut every day, and people would kneel, sit, or uh, or stand. Um, we had a leader who would read a statement about grief, about openness, or about vision, and then people would go into prayer. So that's tent right there. And in fact, I can make this bigger even. There you go. And you can see this is the final day, so there are a lot of people on the perimeter, but typically it would be one person or a family on a mat. And we had people put up tie ribbons, as you can see on the struts of the tents, to signify their prayers. And here we have each day was hosted by a black clergy, and they would read the statements, time the prayers for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and hit the gong when to start and when to end. And that's my wife. She's leading a session there. And yeah, that's the tent. That's pretty much the typical view. As you can see, the prayer ribbons tied to the right and left, and people are in the middle of a session. Right out on your left is the county road, West Broadway. There's a singing bowl. And I'm sorry you can't hear those videos, but they're very moving. You can see in the background over here, you can see the wall of art that was done by local young African American artists, and both sides of these are art. Yeah, this was a minister here, female, local minister. This is my wife and me, Matt. Um, and yep, that's the group there. We had young people, people of all ages come by. Here is the chalkboard. When the chalkboard was full, we'd erase it and then it would go over again. So we have them all recorded. And the theme would be at the top, in the future I see, or I'm grieving for, etc. And you can see by the close to the end how many prayer ribbons were tied on these struts all over the place. And this is me with someone who was doing a documentary of the event. And this is the last day my wife and I were dancing. I don't know. we had a band there that day. So that's the event, and I'm going to take some questions. So you can type your questions in to the chat, and I'll see them, and I will answer. Yesterday, someone asked, and this question kind of colored my presentation. What role did the men's rights play in the plan? Well, you can see we had 2 tents, and I don't know where you had your rights, but ours was in a tent, and so I'm sure I was influenced by that. And then we had the singing bowl, which as a Pentecostal kid turned Baptist man, and inviting local clergy to lead, most of whom were Baptist, you can see that the singing bowl is quite a leap for me and that crowd. Well, not for me anymore, and I was a little concerned that people would see it as a Catholic thing or a Buddhist thing, but everybody enjoyed it and they participated very willingly. And then there was one other point about the men's rights. It was the whole grief issue. And I had the privilege of being a teacher during one of the subsequent rites on grief, a teaching elder. And I taught on grief, and I kind of owned it at that point. And so it was very important for me to acknowledge that deliberately as a right for our group. And if you recall that Brian Mogren came up to me and said, when I met him, introduced me to Richard at a grieving, essentially, vigil. And so Richard's teachings on grief really codified for me what I was feeling and the direction in which I was going. Let's see, Jeffrey asked, he didn't ask, he just said, thanks for the presentation. But David asked, how have these protests changed your life? Well, it's not so much the protests as the event itself of George Floyd's death. For a long time, my wife and I have been insisting that we have to focus on the African American community, that the immigrant community that comes here, and I am an immigrant and Black, so I have both identities. I've lived in the African American community since after college. I've attended black churches, Baptist churches, since I graduated from college. So I've been immersed in the African American community. And I can tell you that the immigrant community from any country that comes here is perhaps in the top 5% of people with drive from any population all over the world. For people to leave their homes, to go through hardships, to come to a foreign land, to learn a new language and lose all their family and friends, and to make it in a new land. You're talking about an elite group of people, psychically elite. And so what happens is they then become part of the poor because they live in the low income community, and they live among people who for generations, not just that point in time, but for people who for generations were told not to aspire, not to dream, beat down whenever they tried to, sit in back of buses, don't drink from that water fountain, don't go to that school, don't go to that club, don't do this, don't do that. And then you have somebody living next door who's America is a great country. We can go there and make it. Anybody can make it in America. And those two people are living side by side. And the philanthropic community treat them as equals. They're not equals. The equal African American is that middle class person that lives next to you. That's the equal one. But they're the African Americans who were so successfully discouraged are living in our inner city communities in poor conditions, going to poor schools and having poor outcomes. And we have felt that this is the abandoned part of the American family. And that's why we moved here. And we feel that we should focus on African American realities. And we've been kind of challenged on that by friends of all races. And this is not a black thing, how about the immigrants? How about the Chinese? There's something going on here with African Americans and Native Americans that is uniquely burdensome and unfair. And it's going to take a lot of love, a lot of attention, and a lot of just as deliberate as the oppression was, so also must the healing be. And so that's what we're doing here. And so to see the upsurge in consciousness over George Floyd's death, that to recognize that, yes, there is indeed something uniquely happening with our country, with African American, especially men, and to admit it and to begin to talk about programs inside of corporate communities for addressing those issues, that is an incredible change. Kerry asked, what reactions were most surprising to you? What disappointed or hurt you? And I assume you meant to the tent, the prayer tent, and the 30 days of prayer. What was most surprising to me was how everybody embraced the African American leadership. Typically, we would not have gotten away with that. People would have said, why is it just African American? But everybody understood that it was needed at this time. And then that everybody came from all races and submitted themselves to that leadership and that reality. That was a very pleasant surprise to me. And also the fact that the African American clergy were willing to embrace the kind of ritualistic approach we had, which again is part of my rites of passage influence to this, and to not try to make it into one of their prayer meetings or one of their services. It was a very, very pleasant thing to see that they were willing to walk into this space and to adhere to the guidelines, silent prayer, 8 minutes, 46 seconds, hit the gong to start and the gong to finish, and the next group comes in. Wipe down all the chairs when we're done before the next group comes in. It was a beautiful thing. And what hurt me or disappointed me? Well, that it had to end. That we didn't have the money, the resources, or the wherewithal to continue it because I've got a job. Basically, my job, micro grants, which is gives grants to low income people um, who are trying to get a business started or a career started, loaned me to this project for the month, and so it just had to end. So that's it. I think we're gonna 5 minutes early to give you a time to go get a break and then come back for the beginning of your next session. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you guys for real at Solarize 2021. Take care, guys.